First, we're going to make a composite of two images. What we're going to do is we're going to take this image and combine it with this image. Can you see the difference in the two? The only difference is the shutter speed that was used. Waterfalls and white water in general can look nice if you do a long exposure. You get this silky look, and a lot of people like that. But the problem is, if there are any trees in the surroundings or other foliage, bushes and other things, and there's any wind, they're going to be blurry. So if you look up here, do you see this area right there? And you see that there's motion blur on it. Well, if I went for a faster shutter speed, and I was on a tripod so the two images line up, the other image might have that area much more crisply captured compared to the one that had a longer exposure. Does that make sense? And so all we're going to do is layer these two images together so that we can use the non-motion blurred greenery that's here, but use the motion blurred water. Make sense? All right, so let's do that. And know that whenever I do anything like this, I'll often start off not using certain features that would be overly useful to use. And it's just because we haven't introduced the concept yet. So if you've used Photoshop for a while, and you might start asking, why is he doing it this way? And it's because I haven't described the thing you're used to using yet, okay? Just so you know. So I'm going to open one of these images. Just hit Open Image in Camera Raw. And then I'll go back to Bridge. I'm using the keyboard shortcut for Bridge. I don't know if you remember it, but to open a document, it would be Command-O. And if you add Shift, it means bring me to Bridge. Open it through. Whoops, I didn't. Okay, there. I'm going to open the other image. Click Open Image. And now I need to get this into the other document. There are many different ways of doing that. I just need to pick one, and we'll eventually learn the other methods, and then we could use them all. But I only can use what I've described so far. So that's why I mentioned if you're used to doing it a certain way, I might do it differently. So I need to get this image on top of the other one. So I want to copy and paste it. But if I go to the Edit menu, Copy, which is right here, is grayed out. Because in Photoshop, you have to tell it what part of the image you want to copy first. And you do that by making a selection. We haven't talked about selections, but for now, we can just go to the Select menu and say All. When I go to the Select menu and choose All, if you watch the edge of my picture, you'll see what some people affectionately refer to as the marching ants. That means that's the edge of the area you're telling Photoshop you want to work on. So in this case, we're working on the entire image. I'll go to the Edit menu. Now Copy is available. So I just copied that. Whenever you copy it, it's being stored in a hidden area that's called the clipboard. And I can close this image because it's being stored somewhere else. It asks me if I want to save the changes. No, I don't want to save these changes. And now I've in the other document that was there. I'll go to the Edit menu and I'll choose Paste. When I choose Paste, watch what happens in my Layers panel. Whenever you paste something in, it always gets deposited on a new layer. So that's one way of creating a new layer. In this case, we have two layers now, and we just have a different picture in each layer. If I go in my Layers panel and I click on the eyeball for the top layer, I'll hide it, revealing the layer that's underneath. Remember, it's as if you're standing at the top of the Layers panel looking down, and right now the top layer is obscuring your view of what's under it. But if I turn off the eyeball, it's as if I slid it out of your way so you can see what was underneath. And here's our two. So the layer that's on top is the one that had the long exposure. And so what I'm going to do here is zoom up, move around to where I can see some of the greenery that's blurry. I'm simply going to grab the eraser tool, and I'm going to make sure I have a soft edge brush. And I'm just going to erase part of the top layer. And when I erase it, it's just like using a pair of scissors and cutting a hole through a physical print. You'd be able to see through it to whatever's underneath. What's underneath is the other picture. So here I'll use the eraser tool. I'm just going to paint right here. As I'm painting, it's deleting this particular layer and therefore revealing whatever's under it. What's under it is the other photo. And so I'll be very careful not to paint where the water is, because I would replace the water with the fast shutter speed version. Now if you look in the layers panel, you can start to see a checkerboard showing up. Remember, checkerboard means empty. So it means I've thrown away these parts of this layer. It's like using a pair of scissors and cutting away part of one print that happens to be sitting on top of another print. So you're standing at the top of the layers panel looking down, and now you can see through these parts that look like a checkerboard, and the thing that you're seeing through it is whatever's under here, which is the other version of the picture. I'm just going to do the rest of this image over here, just using the eraser tool with a soft edge brush. So now let's take a look. I'm going to turn this layer that's underneath off so that it's hidden. Now all we're looking at is the top layer, and you can see where parts of it have been deleted. And I can continue to delete where I happen to notice that I didn't get enough here. That's pretty good. I don't see anything that's moving over in this part. And so all we're doing is looking through that, and wherever the checkerboard is, we'd see what's underneath. So let's turn on what's underneath by turning on its eyeball in the layers panel, and now we filled that in with the other part. If I hide the layer that's above, that's the layer that has the slow water, the blurry water, and I can see there's what's underneath it, and this is what we have on top that has part of it deleted away. So we have now combined those two images. The problem I have with this idea is we deleted that stuff away. And if I save and close this image and open it next month, there's no way to get back what used to be in this part we deleted away. So later on, I'll show you how we could do that in a way that's not permanent. So right now, I don't like that we use the eraser tool. So far with this one, we learned we can copy and pasting is what creates the new layer. And then if we erase away part of one layer, we're just revealing what's underneath it. And that's the only thing I wanted to show you there. I'm going to close this one, and let's create a different one. We're just going to ramp up to creating other things. So here we are at a national park, me and my wife. We just have my iPhone. And we want to take a picture of the two of us together there. And we don't have anything to set our phone on. When there's nobody walking around near us where we can hand them our phone, and we don't want to do a selfie. So what we did is I had Karen sit down there, that's my wife, and I took a picture with my iPhone. And then without moving my iPhone, I said, okay, come over here and grab my iPhone. And so I tried to get her to not move the iPhone, just hand it over to her, holding it in the same position, and I walked over there, and we got that shot. But anytime you hand a phone off, it's going to move. And that's why it's great using tripods and things. But in this case, we didn't have that. So I want to combine together these two photos so it looks as if we were both sitting there and we're in one shot. The end result that I'm looking for is more like this. Okay? So let's do that. Before, we copied and pasted in order to get the two images into the same document. Now let's figure out a different way of doing the same thing. In this case, I'm in Bridge, and I'm going to select two photos, and instead of opening them and then copying and pasting it, get them between documents, I'm going to go to the Tools menu in Bridge. I'm going to go to Photoshop, and there's a choice in here called Load Files into Photoshop Layers. And what that means is load all these images into a single Photoshop file where we end up with one layer for each picture. If I had 30 images selected right now, I'd end up with one Photoshop file that had a total of 30 layers. And it would be the equivalent to me opening all those images separately and just copying and pasting between, same end result. It's just faster, less work. So there we ended up, if you look in the Layers panel, you can see Karen sitting in this one, I'm up on top, right? Now, do you remember yesterday we stitched some panoramas? And when we stitched some panoramas, we selected the images in Bridge, we went to the Tools menu, and there was a choice in there called Photomerge. I want to show you that Photomerge is really using 3 features in Photoshop that we can use manually. The first feature that Photomerge does to stitch a panorama is what we used just now. which is stacking the original images in a single document as separate layers. It first uses the thing called load, whatever it was called, load photos into Photoshop layers. It uses that first to just stack the images. The next thing it does is what I'm about to do. In my layers panel, I'm going to select both of these layers because I want Photoshop to compare these layers, and it's only going to be able to compare whatever's selected currently in here. So right now it thinks I only want to think about this layer and ignore this one. To select the other layer, I'm just going to hold down the Shift key and click on it. So now they're both highlighted. I'm then going to go to the Edit menu, and I'm going to choose a choice called Auto Align Layers. That's the second thing that the command called Photomerge does when it is stitching a panorama. What Photomerge does is it compares the contents of two layers, and wherever it thinks it sees the same contents, it tries to line them up. So let's choose Auto Align Layers. And this comes up. Does this look at all familiar? Doesn't it look like the left side of the Photomerge dialog box, except for it was presented differently? It was presented in a vertical list. It's the same choices. And I'll just leave it set to auto. Click OK. So it just distorted these two layers, rotating them, scaling them, and even bending them to try to get any content that looks the same in the two layers to line up. And so now if I hide the top layer, you can see Karen's still under there. She's in the layer underneath. But both that layer and the layer on top have been distorted so that they line up. Okay? And that's what Auto Align Layers does, and it's found under the Edit menu. Auto Align Layers. So somebody yesterday asked if they could manually line up layers and things. Yeah, you can use Auto Align Layers to get Photoshop to try, and then if it messed up, you could manually move one of the layers more or anything like that. The third thing that Photomerge does, the thing that we use for stitching panoramas, is it seamlessly blends those images. Because right now I can see the edge of this photograph a little bit. Can you tell right here where the edge of this photo ends? And I think it's the shadow of Karen's leg starts to appear. I can also see just a little bit over here where this railing suddenly gets cut off. If I were to hide the layer that's underneath, it's the edge of the top photo. It's just the brightness is the equivalent, so you don't see it all that obviously. But I can select these two photos, go to the Edit menu, and choose Auto Blend Layers. And this is the last step that the Photomerge does. You remember at the bottom of Photomerge there was a checkbox, and it was called, I can't remember the wording, but seamlessly blend images or something like that. It applies this thing. But I'm going to click OK. Let's see what happens. Ooh. Karen's there. Not quite what I was thinking about, though. All right. My legs are kind of odd, if you look at my legs. And also the siding on the building is coming through me, and it's screwing up Karen over there. But it tried to seamlessly blend the two images so you can't tell the seams. It just didn't know that there was a couple parts in that that were somewhat important. It thought the building might be more important. So I'm going to choose Undo. I'll just type Command Z, and let's see if we can influence what it does when it puts those things together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on the top layer, and I'm going to use the eraser tool. And all I'm going to do is erase the top layer, that's the layer that contains me, wherever Karen was sitting, so that it can't use the part of the bench that was covering up Karen. So I'm just using the eraser tool. If you look, I'm working on the top layer, so that's what I'm erasing away. And I'm going to click right here and erase it where Karen is. Great. Okay. Now if you look in the Layers panel, you can see what happened. There used to be part of this top photo right here that was covering up Karen, who's underneath. So we couldn't see her. And I just deleted part of that so that there's nothing covering her up. If I were to hide the layer that's underneath, I just took that chunk away from the top layer. So by doing so, now it's going to be impossible for it to grab this part of the bench from this photo and put it on as part of Karen. But see, I can see where I deleted away. Can you tell that this part is darker than what's just outside of it? I can see this kind of hint of a line here. Hope you guys can see that slight difference. So let's see now if I can merge those together. I'll select the two because it needs to know which layers you want to compare. I'll go to the Edit menu again and choose Auto Blend Layers. And I use the default settings. Click OK. And now it wasn't able to mess up Karen because it didn't have the material that was covering her up to put in. But it could mess me up. Do you see the lines from the building going through my shirt? So I'll choose Undo. And now I might click on the layer that's underneath. And what I'm going to do is delete away parts of what's underneath where my shirt is. Because it was grabbing parts of that building and blending it in, I'm going to just not allow it to do that. So I'm using the eraser tool. I'm going to click right here and I'm going to erase. Now look in the layers panel. It tells you what I'm erasing. I'm not going to erase the photo that contains me. I'm erasing the photo that's underneath because that's what's active. So I'll click right here and I'm going to paint. Even though I don't see any change happening, there is a change happening. If you look in the layers panel, the second I let go, you would find that the photo underneath is being deleted away. So I'll choose Undo a few times. Can you see in the layers panel? I just took that chunk away. And therefore, when you tell it to blend the layers, before it was taking part of the layer that was underneath and kind of blended it into my shirt. Well, it can't do that anymore because what's underneath just isn't there anymore. So I'll grab these two layers again. I got to have them both selected. And I'll finally come over here and say Auto Blend Layers. Just click OK. And it didn't have any material beyond the edge of my legs and the layer underneath, so it created that. All we're going to do is crop because we needed to fix that anyway. There's no material for my legs. But it made it so it's seamless here. It no longer has a difference in brightness across those. So Auto Blend Layers was nice. I did need to kind of manually, though, come in and force it to not be able to use certain material by deleting those areas away. So now what I'm going to do is crop the image. I'll grab the crop tool. In newer versions of Photoshop, it automatically puts a cropping rectangle on the image that starts on the edge that you pull in. In older versions of Photoshop, you would have to click and drag on your picture to get a rectangle to show up. I'm just going to bring this in here and see. I need to get rid of this space up here, but I don't have any extra legs here or other things, so I'm kind of limited. If I move outside of the cropping rectangle, I can rotate, and I think if I rotate it enough, I can get in there and get rid of that empty spot at the top. I'm trying to crop out this upper part. And I'll get as much of my legs as I could get. So I get Karen's feet. Trying to get rid of that thing that's over in the corner. All right, something like that. And then I'm going to press Return or Enter. And now we have our end result. So there's a little bit of work we had to do there to get that to happen. And I could have done it in other ways. I could have done it with a really soft brush when I erased away part of that layer. And then I could have adjusted the layer that contained Karen to brighten or darken it to try to get it to match the other one. But I chose to let Photoshop do some of the work. I try to let it, do the work instead of me. And so we just needed to force it not to be able to use certain parts. So we erased them away. Now in the layers panel, what's left in the layers, it's not overly useful. We've already permanently kind of got them to match, and it's got all sorts of stuff going on in here. When I'm done, I could just combine those together. If you want to say you're done, and I don't need to make changes anymore, that's when you go to the layer menu, and at the very bottom is a choice called Flatten Image. That means make everything permanent. So in the layers panel, it goes into one thing, and it'll be called background. I only do that if I'm done. There's no chance whatsoever I'm going to need to change those individual pieces anymore. I want to permanently combine them together. So there's my end result. So what did we learn on this one? We learned that we don't have to copy and paste to get images between documents. Instead, if we're in Bridge, we can select those images, and there was a command under the Tools, Photoshop menu called Load Files into Photoshop Layers, or something similar to that. I don't remember the exact wording. And that stacks our images. And if you have 10 images, you're going to have 10 layers. If you have 2, you'll have 2 layers, like I did here. The other thing we learned was when you stitch a panorama, Photoshop is really using 3 features, and it's just trying to automate the process for you. So when I select 2 images and I choose this, Photomerge, and it tells me Photoshop's busy as always, and this comes up. The middle part of this dialog box is just another way of presenting you with the choice that was called load files into Photoshop layers. That's what that part does. It loads them. The part on the left uses what's called auto-align layers. And you just have to tell it which setting to use. In this checkbox right here also applies something called auto blend layers. 3 separate features that we could have done separately. So I'll actually do them separately to stitch this panorama. And this is what you do if you had issues with your panorama and you needed to make changes along the way. I would choose load files into Photoshop layers. When it's done loading the files into layers, I just need to make sure that all the layers are selected so that the next feature knows which layers to compare. So I hold Shift and I click on the bottom layer. But that could be 10 layers in there. I go to the Edit menu. I saw Auto-Align Layers. That's what actually puts your panorama together by lining up all the pieces. But I can see where the edge of the photo is. See right there? Where the brightness is different and stuff. So with those 2 layers still selected, I go to the Edit menu and I choose Auto Blend Layers. And I use default settings. Click OK. Although you might need to change to the top setting, we'll see. But anyway, there, it just stitched a panorama. It just took 3 steps to do it. It was nice of Adobe to come up with something that combined the 3 steps, and they called it Photomerge. But we have them available separately because if I sent the other version, the one that had Karen and I in it, just through Photomerge, it would have messed up. It would have done the very first version you saw where the lines were going through Karen and me and all that. So it's really nice that they made them also available separately so we could interact somewhere in the middle of the process to modify the way it worked. So Photomerge is really 3 steps that we could apply separately and do something in between the steps to get a different end result. And that's what we did here. And just like with a panorama, when we were done, we had to crop it.